The cramped kitchen of the semi-detached house in Yorkshire smelled overwhelmingly of stale pine needles and the cold, metallic scent of brewing resentment. It was Christmas Eve, and Elijah, 32, stood rigid beneath the drooping tinsel, one hand clenching the cheap plastic handle of a half-empty mug of tea. His sister Chloe stood opposite, bundled in a ridiculous faux fur coat she couldn't afford, her expression a mask of forced holiday cheer that didn't quite reach her eyes. The conflict wasn't over presence. It was over survival. "It's a last-minute opportunity, Elle. The Hamptons. 3 days. Just handle it," she demanded, her voice rising to a theatrical pitch that seemed to vibrate the dusty window panes. Her 2 children, 8-year-old Mia and 5-year-old Leo, were silently playing on the threadbare carpet, acutely aware of the seismic shift in the adult atmosphere. Elijah could feel the blood pressure rising behind his temples. This was the core loop of their relationship: Chloe's relentless pursuit of superficial status, and Elijah's fatal flaw, resentful altruism. He always cleaned up her messes, but harbored a toxic, slow-burning hatred for the burden, leading him to delay necessary confrontation until disaster struck. "Handle what, Chloe?" Elijah's voice was dangerously low, a scraping sound like ice on pavement. "You promised the kids a proper Christmas. My vacation time is booked for recovery, not childcare." Chloe laughed, a brittle, sharp sound that was utterly devoid of humor. "Don't be dramatic. They're fine. Look, this trip, it's vital for networking. It's my big break." She reached into her excessive designer handbag, pulling out a thin, expensive-looking leather folder. "Just look after them. And more importantly," she lowered her voice to a hiss, pushing the folder onto the cluttered countertop. "This is a small favor. You need to review this portfolio immediately. It has to be submitted to the lead's office, physically signed and stamped, before the bank closes on Boxing Day. 48 hours. The deadline felt like a physical weight settling on Elijah's chest. If he failed to meet the deadline, Chloe hinted vaguely at unrecoverable losses. He had to choose: refuse and let the children down, and perhaps condemn Chloe to financial ruin, or accept the burden, sacrificing his own fragile mental peace and his critical work project. He knew, deep down, that she hadn't just forgotten the children, she had strategically forgotten him. Chloe's smile widened, a victory flash of white teeth against the heavy coat. "Knew I could count on you, Elle." Her hand briefly, patronizingly, touched his shoulder, a gesture that smelled faintly of expensive, unnecessary perfume. He flinched internally, the touch feeling like the brand of ownership. He stared at the folder, the thick, cream-colored paper, the embossed silver logo of a London-based investment firm. His expertise was academic research, not high finance, but Chloe believed his PhD made him magically capable of anything complicated. He couldn't articulate the no that churned in his gut. The vision of Mia's hopeful, wide eyes watching him accept the burden was a silent shackle. He didn't want the kids to think their mother was abandoning them, so he accepted the sacrifice. Resentful altruism demanded he suffer silently, creating a massive debt of future grievance he would never cash. As the taxi pulled away, its wheels crunching on the wet gravel drive, the final sharp sound that sealed the bargain, Elijah walked back into the suffocating warmth of the house. The atmosphere instantly shifted. Mia approached cautiously, dragging a worn teddy bear. Leo was already retreating into the cave of the sofa cushions. The clock ticking was not just the 48 hours until the bank deadline, it was the 2 days he had to navigate their emotional expectations, while deciphering a financial labyrinth that looked dangerously complex. He opened the folder. Inside was not a simple signature form, but hundreds of pages of dense legalese, interwoven with complex municipal regulations specific to Inglaterra, England, and the City of London's property laws. The ink smelled strongly of new paper and desperation. He needed specialized legal knowledge, and he had less than 47 hours now. A quiet dread settled over him, the kind that whispered promises of disaster if he tried to do just enough to survive. The failure to immediately demand clear instructions or to call Chloe back before she boarded her flight was his first tangible mistake, a direct consequence of his inability to set boundaries without malice. He sighed, the sound catching in the dry air. He pushed the papers aside and knelt beside Mia. "Right," he said, forcing a smile onto his numb face. "Christmas is still on, but Uncle L has a massive homework assignment we need to finish first." The texture of the embossed documents felt slick and cold beneath his fingertips, utterly alien to his world of worn academic texts. The next morning, Christmas Day, smelled like burnt toast and the faint, sweet trace of old fireplace soot. Elijah had managed 4 restless hours of sleep, punctuated by the rustling of heavy legal documents as the children finally succumbed to the exhausted silence of morning cartoons. He sat at the kitchen table, the financial portfolio spread out, the cold December light reflecting painfully off the high-gloss paper. He needed to understand the core risk. The document centered around a high-leverage property flip in a rapidly developing area of Greater London, a deal Chloe had evidently entered into with alarming haste and minimum due diligence. His fatal flaw, resentful altruism, manifested immediately. Instead of seeking immediate professional help, which would mean admitting to an outsider how deeply Chloe relied on him, he tried to decipher the labyrinth himself. He convinced himself he needed to find this smoking gun first, to justify his eventual intervention, ensuring the maximum amount of self-pity when he saved the day. Mia asked for pancakes. Leah was busy attempting to disassemble an expensive, highly complex electronic toy that Chloe had bought purely for show. Elijah focused on the screen of his laptop, cross-referencing terminology. Restrictive covenants, leasehold traps, negative equity projections. The sound of the children's muffled play was a constant distracting hum, underlining the urgency of his domestic responsibilities versus the looming financial threat. The deadline was now rapidly approaching. 40 hours. He tried calling his only reliable legal contact, an overworked barrister named Robert who specialized in copyright, not corporate finance. The phone rang 8 times, the tone sterile and mechanical, before kicking to voicemail. Robert, understandably, was unreachable on Christmas Day in England. The weight of expectation felt heavier than the paperwork itself. He wasn't just babysitting, he was stabilizing an invisible, ticking bomb. He finally focused on a specific clause concerning a penalty payment triggered by non-completion of a final submission. It wasn't just unrecoverable losses. It was a catastrophic penalty clause designed to wipe out the small borrowed capital and attach a substantial lien against the only major asset Chloe owned, the small, semi-detached house they currently occupied. The threat was immediate and deeply personal. He pushed his chair back abruptly, the plastic skidding loudly on the linoleum floor. The cold air from the window offered no relief. He had to get this signed, sealed, and delivered to the bank branch in Leeds before they closed on Boxing Day, which meant navigating closed roads, limited public transport, and the near-total shutdown of England during the holiday. The first real hurdle arrived late on Christmas afternoon. Elijah needed the original deeds to the house, mentioned in the portfolio as collateral, to verify a specific detail that might nullify the penalty clause. Chloe had cryptically said they were in a safe place. After 30 minutes of frantic searching, the children clinging to his legs asking why they couldn't open any more presents, he found the lockbox tucked beneath a pile of unused winter blankets in the spare room. The cold, musty air of the forgotten room was thick with the scent of mothballs and old dust. Obstacle 1, 25%. The practical challenge. The lockbox required a key. Chloe hadn't left a key. Resentful altruism spiked. He momentarily pictured leaving the box untouched, letting Chloe face the full consequence of her incompetence. But then he saw Mia's face, already pale from the stress. He couldn't risk the children becoming homeless. Mia. He knelt down, meeting her eye level. Can you think where Mummy keeps special little keys? A safe place? Mia's brow furrowed, concentrating on the challenge, tapping her finger on the lid of the box, the texture rough and metallic under her touch. She pointed a small finger toward a large, ornate ceramic tea caddy on the top shelf of the kitchen cupboard. It was the same caddy Chloe used for display, insisting it was an antique, though Elijah knew it was mass-produced. He dragged a chair over, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet house, and retrieved the caddy. It was heavier than he expected. Inside, mixed with stale Earl Grey leaves, was a small tarnished silver key. The scent of bergamot and old tea filled the air as he turned the key in the lockbox. He realized, with a chilling certainty, that Mia was the real holder of their domestic truth, the invisible archivist of her mother's chaos. Inside the box were the deeds, wrapped in plastic, but also something else. A formal, sealed letter from a different solicitor's office in London, dated 6 months prior, clearly marked urgent. The paper felt brittle and fragile in his hands. He ignored the deeds for a moment, pulling the letter open. His eyes scanned the precise, dry legal language. It wasn't about the London property flip. It was about his academic fellowship application, based in England. Chloe had intercepted the final acceptance letter, confirming he had won the prestigious, life-changing placement, and deliberately buried it. The acceptance required a signature and confirmation of residence submitted 3 months ago. The sound of the children giggling at the television faded into a distant buzz. The deadline for his future had passed. Elijah's hands were shaking violently now, scattering the brittle letter and the heavy deeds across the countertop. This wasn't just incompetence, it was malice. A deliberate sabotage designed to ensure he remained trapped in her orbit, available for crises like this. The cold, raw emotion that gripped him was sharper than any financial fear. He gripped the edge of the counter, the smooth, cold laminate digging into his palm. His own deadline had expired. He had sacrificed his future for her perceived needs long before the 48-hour countdown started. He forced himself to breathe, focusing on the children's rhythmic breathing, the sound a necessary anchor. He had to compartmentalize the betrayal. The house was still at risk, and the clock was still ticking. 36 hours, until the bank closed. He turned back to the deeds. The detail he needed was a complex historical covenant requiring proof of communal maintenance payments to the local council in Yorkshire, a document that should have been included in Chloe's finance portfolio. It was missing. He needed to find that receipt, or the entire property deal in London would be nullified, triggering the penalty clause and erasing Chloe's fragile attempt at wealth. The irony was painful. He had to save her luxury trip abroad by digging through the mundane, frustrating details of their shared English domesticity. He spent the next few hours tearing apart the small, cluttered office space Chloe reserved for business, inhaling the dry, papery scent of old bills and cheap stationery. Mia helped, dutifully sorting through piles of old bank statements, while Leo made a fort out of the cardboard archive boxes, the texture rough against his cheeks. Elijah found receipts for expensive dinners, spa weekends, and clothes, all recent, but no council maintenance receipts older than 2 years. "Mummy keeps the important things near the front door," Mia suddenly offered, her voice barely a whisper, pointing toward an ugly, oversized ceramic umbrella stand in the entryway. Elijah hesitated, his muscles cramping from the prolonged squatting. He lifted the stand. Beneath a layer of muddy umbrellas and dripping Wellington boots, amidst the sharp, earthy scent of damp rubber and old water, was a small, locked metal filing box. This time he didn't need a key. He pulled on his academic focus, remembering Chloe's haphazard memory. He tried her birthday. The lock clicked. Inside were the missing crucial receipts, along with something much worse. Obstacle 2, 50%. The moral dilemma and reversion, 1. Mixed in with the council receipts was a stack of credit card statements from a high-interest lender, clearly labeled London Bridge Development Account. The total debt was staggering, exceeding the entire value of the family home. But worse, a detailed breakdown of expenditures from the last month revealed not only luxury hotels and designer purchases, but also a substantial transfer of funds made 3 days ago to a separate private bank account in Chloe's name, disguised as a consultancy fee within the property portfolio. Reversion 1. What Elijah believed was simply an attempt by Chloe to save her investment, and, by proxy, their house, was wrong. The financial documents weren't for submission to complete the deal. They were the final documents for the withdrawal from the deal. She wasn't seeking to finalize the property flip. She was attempting to engineer a controlled, catastrophic failure. She had already pulled out her minimal capital, and the paperwork he held was designed to ensure the entire penalty fell onto the third-party investor, who, according to the deeds, was another minor investor in England, not the massive corporation Chloe implied. The whole trip to the Hamptons was a lie. It was a distraction, timed perfectly so she could escape the fallout while Elijah was stuck holding the documents that would legally incriminate him as the final submitter. The sickening realization hit him. He wasn't her savior. He was her scapegoat. The cold metallic smell of the lockbox and the sweet, lingering scent of Chloe's perfume on the paper magnified the betrayal. He looked at the paperwork, then at the children watching cartoons, oblivious to the fact that their mother hadn't just used them as an excuse. She had made Elijah the fall guy for potential fraud. The clock now read 33 hours. The moral dilemma was stark. Submit the paperwork as instructed, knowing he would legally absorb the fallout of Chloe's calculated failure, potentially facing severe legal repercussions, and definitely losing the house, or destroy the portfolio, protecting himself but leaving the other innocent minor investor to face Chloe's pre-planned penalty. The house, either way, seemed doomed. His resentful altruism warred violently with pure self-preservation. Elijah's immediate reaction was to find a match and reduce the whole toxic mess to ash. He slammed the filing box shut, the metallic sound sharp enough to make Mia jump. But he stopped, staring at the carefully planned submission date. If the documents were never submitted, the contract would likely default, but the primary target of Chloe's penalty trap, the unsuspecting investor, might still be exposed. The sheer venom of Chloe's plan demanded not destruction, but exposure. He picked up the phone and typed Chloe's number. The call went straight to international voicemail, confirming his suspicion that she was actively avoiding contact. He then tried Robert, the barrister, again. Still nothing. The weight of the legal risk, now not just financial ruin but potential accessory to fraud, pressed down on him. He was suffocating under the silence of a Christmas day in the north of England, forced to make a life-altering legal decision alone. He pulled out his laptop again, ignoring the pang of loss regarding his fellowship. He spent the remainder of the evening, the smell of cold leftover turkey now permeating the house, cross-referencing the transfer codes and the investor's name. The investor, Marcus Davies, was listed as residing in a small town near Manchester. A quick search revealed Davies wasn't a corporate shark, but a retired teacher who had invested his pension savings, believing Chloe's elaborate pitch. Elijah's initial surge of resentful altruism, the desire to make Chloe feel the pain of her mistakes, was suddenly overshadowed by a pure, urgent need for justice. He had to pivot from being the scapegoat to being the prosecutor, but he couldn't do it alone. The deadline to stop the submission from triggering the worst penalties was fast approaching. 29 hours. He needed to find a way to meet the bank deadline, but with a different set of documents. He pulled out the deeds he found earlier. The communal maintenance receipts proved Chloe had been withholding essential payments, creating a separate, minor technical default on the house itself. This minor default was the key to an alternative submission. He grabbed his academic research notes, the texture of the cheap paper familiar and comforting, and began furiously drafting a counter-argument. He would submit the documentation, but he would also include an addendum detailing the technical default on the collateral, forcing the bank to pause the submission and demand a full investigation into the collateral's true value before accepting the penalty-triggering final documents. The transition from academic analyst to financial strategist was brutal. Elijah worked through the night, powered by lukewarm tea and the righteous fury of his discovered betrayal. He printed out his detailed legal argument, a meticulously footnoted document explaining the technical flaws in Chloe's paperwork, utilizing the obscure municipal codes common in northern England. The printer whirred and spat out page after page, the only loud sound cutting through the thick silence of the early Boxing Day morning. The paper smelled intensely of toner and desperation. He signed his name on the cover letter, an act of intentional exposure. His resentful altruism was mutating. He was no longer acting out of sacrifice for Chloe, but out of a fierce, protective commitment to justice, even if it meant sacrificing his own anonymity and stability. He knew this action would guarantee the end of his relationship with Chloe, but the loss of the fellowship had already severed the last tether to his old life. At 6 a.m., with only but 21 hours free remaining, he bundled the sleeping children into the back of his old Ford Fiesta. Mia was nestled under a thick blanket, her hair smelling faintly of sleep and shampoo. Leo was clutching his dismantled toy. Elijah didn't have time for the luxury of a slow wake-up. The journey to the Leeds office, normally an hour, would be severely hampered by the Boxing Day travel restrictions and the sudden burst of snow that had begun to fall, creating a slick, dangerous texture on the roads. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the cold plastic. The car heater was struggling against the deep winter chill of England. He glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing Mia's sleepy profile. He had to keep them safe, financially and physically. This mission was no longer about saving Chloe's face. It was about exposing her real price tag. The first major delay came 30 minutes into the drive. A multi-car pileup on the main motorway, forcing a massive detour onto icy rural backroads. The clock was ticking faster now than the windscreen wipers struggled against the growing intensity of the snowfall. Obstacle 3, 75%, the maximum crisis. The detour took Elijah through winding, ungridded country lanes. He drove slowly, painstakingly, the tires biting into the fresh, cold snow. Leo woke up, starting to whine about being hungry and cold. Mia, usually resilient, started to cough, a deep, rasping sound that worried Elijah instantly. The car cabin was thick with the scent of damp wool and stale air. Then, disaster struck, the consequence of his long-delayed confrontation with Chloe finally manifesting. Because he had spent the night dissecting her paperwork instead of preparing the children, he had only grabbed a few snacks and a thermos. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died completely halfway up a steep, desolate hill. He tried the ignition again. A weak clicking sound was the only reply. Out of petrol. In his haste and exhaustion, Elijah had failed to check the fuel gauge. The failure wasn't mechanical. It was a pure, exhausted human error, directly linked to the emotional and physical drain Chloe had imposed. His resentful altruism had prioritized the legal battle over the basic practicalities of survival, leaving them stranded. The silence outside the car was deafening, a thick, white blanket of winter quiet that felt more threatening than any loud noise. Elijah looked at the dashboard clock. 15 hours remaining. He was miles from any major road or open service station in this remote part of Shire, England. He unbuckled his seatbelt, the sharp, cold air hitting his face as he stepped outside. The snow had intensified, blurring the landscape. He pulled out his mobile phone, his fingers rapidly turning numb in the biting cold. 0 service. Mia's coughing became more persistent, the sound tightening Elijah's chest. He looked at the portfolio on the passenger seat, the solution to Chloe's self-inflicted crisis, and realized it was utterly useless if he couldn't get the children to safety first. The maximum crisis wasn't the financial loss. It was the immediate threat to the children's health and safety, directly resulting from his delayed response and exhaustion. He grabbed the emergency blanket and started walking towards the distant gray smudge on the horizon that might be a farmhouse. Elijah walked for 20 agonizing minutes, the heavy snow stinging his cheeks, the cold seeping through his inadequate coat. The smell of frozen earth and clean metallic snow dominated the air. He tried to think, tried to summon the bitter, simmering anger that had fueled him for the last 48 hours, but it was gone, replaced by pure, terrifying clarity. His resentful altruism had been a shield against confronting his sister, but now it was a dead weight, a distraction that had nearly cost them everything. He was no hero, no martyr. He was just an exhausted man who had constantly prioritized the idea of confrontation through sacrifice over the simple, difficult truth through refusal. He stopped, sinking onto a moss-covered stone wall, the rough texture of the freezing stone burning his hands through his thin gloves. He pulled out his phone again, desperately scanning the screen. A single, unstable bar of signal flickered. He didn't waste time trying Chloe. He searched for the name Marcus Davies. The contact details he found earlier appeared. A landline number. He realized that if he was going to save the children, he couldn't play Chloe's legal game anymore. He had to appeal to basic human intervention. He dialed, his hand trembling so hard he almost dropped the phone. It rang, a long, suspenseful sound in the cold silence. On the 8th ring, a gruff, elderly voice answered. "Hello? Who is this? It's Boxing Day?" "Mr. Davies, my name is Elijah. I'm Chloe's brother. You need to listen to me carefully. I'm stranded with your niece and nephew, and your investment portfolio is a fraudulent trap designed to bankrupt you. I have the proof, but I'm stuck, and the bank deadline is in 13 hours. Elijah spoke rapidly, ignoring the desperate catches in his breath. He didn't ask for help with the petrol. He didn't mention the children's need for shelter. He appealed solely to the shared threat, knowing that only by linking their fates would Davies respond with the urgency required. There was a long silence on the other end, punctuated only by the crackle of the unstable connection. Then, Davies' voice, suddenly sharp and clear. "You mention a technical flaw. The communal maintenance payments? I suspected that might be it. Where exactly are you, son?" Elijah described their isolated location, giving the coordinates as best as his phone's rudimentary mapping system allowed. Marcus Davies, the unsuspecting investor, was revealed to be a far more astute local than Chloe had assumed. He wasn't just a retired teacher. He was a former surveyor with intimate knowledge of the obscure land laws of the north of Tumau, England. "Stay put. Don't move those children into this weather. I know that track. I'll be there in an hour. Don't worry about the Leeds Bank. I'll make the necessary calls, but you have to give me the full details when I arrive." Elijah returned to the car, pulling the heavy blanket tighter around Mia and Leo. The scent of fear was slowly dissipating, replaced by the faint, comforting smell of wool and unexpected rescue. 11 hours remained. When Davies arrived, driving a beat-up but sturdy Land Rover, the sheer force of his presence was overwhelming. He was a large man, bundled in thick tweed, his face ruddy from the cold. He swiftly administered emergency petrol, got the children warm, and without judgment, listened to Elijah's rushed, frantic explanation of Chloe's entire scheme: the false investment, the technical defaults, the intentional scapegoating, and the burial of Elijah's fellowship letter. The cold air in the car seemed to hold the weight of Chloe's complete moral collapse. Davies didn't scoff or panic. He nodded slowly, his rough, dry hands resting on the steering wheel. She played a long game, your sister, but she forgot that lawyers hate being rushed on Boxing Day, and they despise technical errors that make them look incompetent. He smiled, a thin, humorless line. The bank deadline is a problem of logistics, not law now. I know the legal loophole to pause the submission indefinitely, provided we get the evidence, your evidence, to my solicitor, now. They drove to Davies' secluded farmhouse, the Land Rover easily handling the icy terrain. The sound of the tires crunching over the hard, frozen ground was rhythmic and reassuring. Davies set Elijah up in a small, warm study that smelled strongly of old leather and pipe tobacco, while his wife took the children to the kitchen for hot chocolate. Elijah, adrenaline waning, felt the immense pressure lift, allowing exhaustion to flood his limbs. But the final, critical step remained. Climax, on the exact limit of the deadline. Davies' solicitor, roused from his Boxing Day slumber, agreed to an emergency video conference. It was now 3:30 p.m. The bank in Leeds closed at 4 p.m. 30 minutes. Elijah sat before the camera, the harsh, unforgiving light illuminating the dark circles under his eyes, and the absolute exhaustion etched into his face. Davies stood beside him, a silent, imposing witness. Elijah didn't just explain the technical default. He methodically laid out the evidence of the intentional manipulation, the hidden consulting fee, the buried fellowship letter, which showed a clear motive for sabotage, and the direct link between the missing maintenance receipts and the London transaction's final penalty structure. He held up the physical documents, allowing the solicitor to scrutinize the signatures and dates. The smell of the warm room, heavy with wood smoke and old paper, was a dizzying contrast to the freezing morning. The solicitor, a lean, sharp man named Mr. Finch, rubbed his temples. Professor, this is compelling. The deliberate withholding of collateral status information is a clear breach of fiduciary duty. We have enough to slap an emergency injunction on the submission before the 4 p.m. deadline. Elijah watched the solicitor's face, the image blurry for a moment through the exhaustion, realizing that the fight was finally moving out of his hands and into the jurisdiction of true power. The final hurdle was the bank itself. Finch explained that they needed an in-person representative to present the injunction and physically stop Chloe's pre-signed documents from being processed. I'm in London, Professor. It's impossible for me to get there. Mr. Davies, can you... Davies shook his head, looking down at his foot, encased in a heavy walking boot. Tore my Achilles last month. I can't rush. Elijah straightened his spine, ignoring the protesting ache in every muscle. 5 minutes. I'll go, he said, his voice raw but determined. I know exactly what to look for. I'm already signed as the initial submitter on the outside envelope. I'll take the risk. Davies handed him a sealed envelope containing the injunction papers and a set of rapid instructions. Elijah snatched the keys to the Land Rover. He drove the final desperate mile to the bank, weaving through the minimal Boxing Day traffic, the sound of the engine a loud, frantic roar. He sprinted through the bank doors at 3:59 p.m., the texture of the cold brass handle biting into his sweaty palm. Elijah skidded to a stop at the counter, catching his breath, the humid, pressurized air of the bank thick and smelling of disinfectant. The single teller, a young woman with a tired expression, was already pulling the security chain across the access point. We're closed, sir. Wait, Elijah gasped, shoving Chloe's original portfolio and the injunction documents across the counter. This portfolio submission, the one due today, it must be accepted, but immediately frozen. Emergency legal injunction, full fraud investigation required. He pointed a trembling finger at the box where Chloe's documents were scheduled to be deposited. The teller sighed, picking up the heavy packet, scanning the details. It's already logged, sir. We were processing the final batch now. Just then, Elijah's mobile rang, a panicked international number. Chloe. Elijah! Did you submit the paperwork? Tell me you did it or I'm ruined. Her voice was frantic, the sound tinny and distorted over the poor connection. Elijah stared at the teller, who was now holding the injunction papers, her eyes widening as she read the words fraud and emergency injunction. Reversion 2. The final revelation. Elijah had assumed Chloe's only goal was to escape the penalty herself and sacrifice Davies. But hearing the panic in her voice, he realized the ultimate truth about the luxury trip and the entire scheme. You're not in the Hamptons, are you, Chloe? Elijah asked, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. You're in an airport, aren't you? Waiting to flee. You didn't just sabotage the property deal, you leveraged the children's house as part of your escape route, not just to pay off the penalty, You plan to be gone entirely. A horrible, brittle silence hung on the line. The teller gasped softly, freezing with both stacks of paper in her hand. The reality of her extreme selfishness, the final cold precision of her plan, solidified everything he had done. It was the only way, Elle. I needed the house liquidity to cover the final transfer. Chloe shrieked into the phone. Elijah hung up, cutting her off mid-sentence. He looked directly at the teller. The documents she sent me, they trigger the penalty against the third party. My injunction reverses that. It triggers the fraud investigation, which will trace the funds she already transferred and place an immediate lien on her private accounts, ensuring the debt returns to the source. Submit both. Now. The teller, faced with the legal threat of the injunction, stamped both packets simultaneously. Received. 4 p.m. The bank doors clicked shut. Elijah stumbled out of the bank and back into the cold Boxing Day air. The immediate financial crisis was averted. The house was saved and Marcus Davies was safe. The victory was immense, pure, and overwhelming. Conclusion with cost. Victory. Permanent loss. Elijah returned to Davies' farmhouse. The children were asleep upstairs, warm and safe, the scent of fresh baking and safety thick in the air. Davies poured Elijah a strong, dark whiskey, the texture of the liquid burning his throat. You did it, son. You exposed her. She won't be seeing any luxury trip now. She'll be seeing handcuffs at customs if she tries to leave England. The victory was the children's security and the clear public exposure of Chloe's calculated cruelty. But the cost was profound and permanent. The investigation that followed secured the family home, but it also confirmed the timeline for Elijah's fellowship. His opportunity was gone, permanently lost due to the intentional deception of his sister. The victory over Chloe's financial ruin meant the complete dissolution of their relationship. The toxic cycle of resentful altruism was finally broken because there was nothing left to resent, only an absence where family used to be. He raised the glass, the ice clinking softly, marking the final, definitive split from his past life. Weeks later, the children returned to their house, now under the temporary guardianship of Elijah. He had to drop his career plans entirely to assume the role of primary caregiver. Mia no longer asked where the special keys were. She simply brought Elijah a mug of tea when his hands started to shake from stress. Leo had rebuilt his toy, a small tangible sign of healing and stability. Elijah stood in the living room, the winter light weak but steady. He looked at the place where the lockbox had been, then at the untouched letter confirming his lost fellowship. The price of saving the children from their mother's luxury trip was his own future, a permanent, deep scar of lost ambition. He accepted it, finally, without resentment. The bitter truth was that he had only become truly free and competent when he stopped trying to save Chloe and focused entirely on those who truly needed him. He picked up his mug, the ceramic warm and familiar in his tired hands. He was home now, truly home for the first time.